You see it the second the drone crests the ridge, a shape pressed into the mud of eastern Turkey. Not a hill, not a rockfall, a hull, pointed at one end, squared at the other, lying 1,900 meters up a mountain where no boat has any business being. And underneath it, sealed for thousands of years, a chamber that a team of scientists finally opened. Here's what I believe after 2 years buried in this evidence. That the shape everyone laughed off as a mud blister is the exact length the oldest text on Earth says the arc should be, and the ground-penetrating scans of what sits beneath it show angles that erosion does not make. I am going to hand you a coordinate, a radar data set from 2019, and a soil report that came back with numbers nobody on the expedition wanted to say out loud. None of this is legend. All of it is on record. You can look up every name I give you. I did not start out believing any of this. I want to be honest with you about that. I opened this case expecting to close it in an afternoon, to prove it was a rock and move on. I remember the exact moment that stopped working. It was late. I had the survey overlay from the site on one screen and the specification from an ancient tablet on the other, and the numbers matched to within a few feet. I actually pushed my chair back from the desk, because the thing you are looking at has a name and a location and a paper trail that goes back further than most people realize. They call it the Durupinar Formation. It sits near the village of Uzungili, in the Doğu Bayezid district of Ara province, in far eastern Turkey, only a few miles from the border with Iran. The coordinates are roughly 39 degrees north and 44 degrees northeast, about 6.5 kilometers south of the summit region of a mountain called Tencerek, and roughly 18 miles south of the peak everyone assumes the story points to, Mount Ararat. That distance matters, and I will come back to why. A Turkish army captain named İlhan Durupinar found it. In 1959, he was reviewing aerial photographs taken for a NATO mapping survey, looking for military features, and this shape stopped him cold. A smooth, symmetrical, boat-like outline sitting alone in the highland mud. He flagged it. The photo was published, and in 1960, a small American team went out to look. And here's the first crack in the story that has bothered me for a long time. That first expedition, in 1960, spent barely a day on the site. They dug a couple of test pits, found what they described as ordinary soil and rock, and left. They declared it a natural formation, a lump of mud and stone that just happened to look like a ship. Case closed. Everybody went home. But look at what they actually measured before they dismissed it. The formation is about 157 meters long. Hold that number, because it is the number this entire mystery turns on. The oldest description of the arc that survives does not come from where you think. Forget the storybook. The measurement most people quote is 300 cubits long. A cubit is the length of a forearm, roughly 45 to 52 centimeters depending on which ancient standard you use. Do the arithmetic. 300 cubits lands you somewhere between about 135 meters and 157 meters. The upper end of that range is 157 meters. The exact length of the shape in the mud? Now, I know what you are already thinking, because I thought it too. A coincidence. Pick any big lump of ground, measure it however you like, and you can force a match. I did not want to hang anything on one number either. So I went looking for the physical evidence, the stuff that erosion and wishful thinking cannot both explain at once. And that is where the ground under this story starts to move. In the 1970s and 80s, a man named Ron Wyatt made this site famous. And I will be blunt with you about him, because your trust matters more to me than the story. Wyatt was an amateur, a nurse anesthetist from Tennessee, not a geologist, not an archaeologist. He made claims about this site that were sweeping, dramatic, and in several cases, simply not supported. Mainstream science wrote him off, and in a lot of ways they were right to. But here is the trap I nearly fell into. Because the messenger was unreliable, everyone assumed the entire site was worthless. And that is a logical mistake. A bad witness at a real crime scene does not make the crime scene fake. So I threw out Wyatt's conclusions and went back to only the hard instrument data, the readings taken by trained scientists who came later with real equipment. That is when this stopped being a curiosity and started keeping me up at night. In the mid-1980s, a geophysical survey was carried out on the formation using ground-penetrating radar and what is called subsurface interface radar. The team included people with actual credentials. They ran their antennas back and forth across the hull shape, sending pulses down into the ground and reading what bounced back. Solid natural rock returns a chaotic, random scatter. There is no pattern, because nature does not lay things out in rows. That is not what came back. The scans showed regular, repeating reflections, straight lines running the length of the formation, evenly spaced vertical returns crossing them at intervals, like ribs, a pattern that the surveyors themselves compared to a structure with internal walls and regularly spaced supports. One of the men involved said on record that the data was too organized to be natural, that you do not get periodic symmetrical returns like that from a random pile of mud and rock. I sat with those printouts for a long time. Because a mud blister does not have evenly spaced internal walls, a landslide does not arrange itself into parallel lines, the length of a football field, and then add cross beams at regular distances. But radar can be misread. I know that. Wet clay, buried stone layers, trapped pockets of gas, all of it can throw echoes that a hopeful eye turns into architecture. So I set the radar aside too, and I asked a simpler question. What is the shape actually made of? Because you cannot argue with chemistry. And this is the part of the investigation where I stopped being a skeptic. Between about 2019 and 2023, a genuine scientific effort finally took this site seriously. Teams from 3 Turkish universities got involved, including Istanbul Technical University, Ari Ibrahim Chechen University, and Andrew University in the United States. They pulled more than 30 soil and rock samples from across the formation and from the ground surrounding it, and they sent them to accredited laboratories for analysis. This was not a man with a shovel and a theory. This was labs, spectrometers, and dating equipment. The results, announced around late 2023, are the reason I made this whole investigation. The samples taken from inside the boat-shaped formation were chemically different from the ground around it. The material inside carried traces of marine origin, sea-related residues, along with elevated readings of certain clay materials and organic matter that did not match the surrounding highland soil. And the radiocarbon dating on that organic material returned an age range of roughly 5,500 to 3,000 years before the Common Era. Sit with those two facts side by side. Marine residue. On a mountain. Nearly 2,000 meters above sea level, and an age that lands squarely in the window the ancient flood accounts describe. I checked whether that date could be innocent. Maybe the whole plateau was underwater in some ancient geological age, and the marine trace is just left over from a prehistoric seabed. But that does not work, because a seabed would salt the entire region evenly. The surrounding control samples did not carry the same marine signature. The sea residue was concentrated in the shape, in the hull, not spread across the plateau the way a drowned landscape would leave it. Something that had been in contact with water sat down in that spot, and the ground kept a record of it, and the record does not match its own neighborhood. Therefore, the question stops being whether the shape is interesting and becomes something much heavier. Why, for more than 60 years after Captain Durupinar first circled it on a photograph, did the people with the authority and the funding to settle this refuse to properly dig it? This is the thread I want you to stay for, because this is where a mystery turns into something that genuinely made me angry. Consider the timeline. 1959, the shape is found. 1960, a one-day visit declares it natural, and everyone walks away for 25 years. When the radar data in the 80s came back looking structured, it did not trigger a major excavation. It triggered silence. The academic establishment treated the entire subject as radioactive because it was tangled up with amateurs and true believers, and no serious researcher wanted their name anywhere near the word arc. I understand the caution. Careers are fragile, but there is a difference between caution and refusing to look. You do not need to believe the flood story to run a proper dig. You just need to test the ground. And for decades, nobody with real resources would. The people best equipped to open this case chose, again and again, not to. And when you actually stand at the site, the reasons to look only multiply. The formation does not sit on flat land. It sits within what geologists have described as a flow of mud and rock, as if the whole shape was carried down and deposited by an enormous surge, then left stranded when the ground firmed up around it. The pointed end faces uphill. The blunt end faces downhill. If this were simply a chunk of mountain that slid, you would expect chaos, a smear, a fan of debris. Instead, you get a single, contained, symmetrical object with a bow and a stern orientation sitting inside the flow like a ship dropped by a receding tide. And the dimensions do not stop at the length. The width of the formation is roughly 23 to 26 meters at its widest. Run that against the ancient specification again, 50 cubits wide. At the same cubit lengths that gave us 157 meters, 50 cubits comes out to somewhere around 22 to 26 meters. The width matches the text just as closely as the length does. Two independent measurements, both landing on the numbers written down thousands of years ago. That is the moment the coincidence argument starts to buckle, because a single lucky match is a coincidence, but two matching dimensions from the same ancient ratio is a pattern. But I promised you I would not let this become a highlight reel of everything that fits. I owe you the strongest version of the boring explanation. Because if you are the kind of person who distrusts a story that is too clean, this next part is built for you. I need you to stay right here, because this is the argument I spent the longest trying to make work. The mainstream geological explanation has a name. It is called a syncline, and more specifically, the site is described as a feature created by a mud flow forming around a resistant core of harder rock. The idea goes like this. Underground, there is a lens of solid, erosion-resistant rock, a doubly plunging syncline, essentially a boat-shaped fold in the bedrock. Softer mud and clay flowed around it. Over centuries, the soft material eroded away faster than the hard core, and what was left standing, proud of the landscape, just happened to take on a streamlined, hull-like form. No arc. Just differential erosion around a lucky-shaped rock. I took that explanation seriously. I read the geological survey that proposed it. And on paper, it is elegant, because syncline formations are real, they do occur, and nature absolutely can carve shapes that fool the eye. But then I laid the erosion model against the actual measured evidence, point by point, and watched it come apart. Maybe you have felt that same frustration tonight, sitting there with a radar scan on one screen and an official verdict on the other, wondering why the people paid to dig keep choosing not to. That gap between what we are taught and what the ground actually says is exactly what the Lost Origins Complete Library was built to close. Across 3 digital volumes you can read on any device, First Threshold, Deep Signal, and Hidden Systems, you get the full method for reading contested sites like this one without being fooled. First, Threshold walks you through how AI-driven LiDAR is uncovering ruins invisible for 10,000 years and lays out the anatomy of a real archaeological controversy, the ship in the mountain itself. Deep Signal goes deeper into the Durupinar formation, the evidence no expert can agree on, examined cold. And Hidden Systems ties every framework into one complete casebook, including the Durupinar archaeology of sacred claims. Here is something you can test for free tonight. Do the arithmetic on the numbers I gave you earlier, 300 cubits at 45 to 52 centimeters each, and see for yourself if it lands near 157 meters. Then look up Ilhan Durupinar's name and check that the 1959 photograph is real, because every name in this case is on record, and you can verify it yourself. The fastest way to get the books is to scan the QR code right there on your screen, or go to the link in the description or the pinned comment. And the reason to start now is simple. That soil report is not going anywhere, but the chamber under this formation has stayed sealed for decades, and nobody with real resources would open it. First, the symmetry. Differential erosion is a messy process. It follows the hardness of the rock, the direction of the water, the freeze and thaw of the seasons. It does not produce a shape that is smoothly symmetrical along a central axis, with a matched taper at both ends. The Durupinar formation has a bow and a stern that mirror the same streamlined geometry. Erosion has no reason to be that even. Second, the internal structure. Even if erosion sculpted the outside into a hole by pure chance, it does not explain the radar. Differential erosion around a hard core gives you a solid lump. It does not give you parallel internal walls and evenly spaced perpendicular returns running through the interior. A syncline is a fold in solid rock. It is not hollow, and it is not divided into regular compartments. Yet the subsurface scans read like the inside of a framed structure. Third, and this is the one the erosion model simply cannot touch, the chemistry. A syncline is bedrock. Bedrock does not carry concentrated marine residue that its surrounding soil lacks. Differential erosion of local stone cannot deposit sea-related material inside one shape and leave the ground 10 meters away clean. The soil report does not describe an eroded rock. It describes foreign material that arrived from somewhere else and settled in that outline. So, the honest conclusion is this. The erosion theory explains the silhouette if you squint. It cannot explain the symmetry, the internal pattern, and the chemistry all at once. And a good explanation has to account for all the evidence, not just the part that is easiest to dismiss. That is the point where I stopped being able to call this a rock. Therefore, I went back to the one question that all of this had been circling. If there truly is internal structure, evenly spaced walls, compartments beneath the surface, then somewhere in that formation, there should be a space. An enclosed volume, and the newest scanning work suggested exactly that. Beneath the upper layers, the geophysical readings indicated regular voids and a large, enclosed rectangular feature that the survey team described as consistent with a room, a chamber. And that word changes everything, because a chamber is the one thing erosion can never, ever produce. Let me walk you into it the way the investigation did, because the sequence is what makes it land. The ground-penetrating radar work that ran across the formation was tuned to read depth, and what came back was layered. Near the surface, disturbed soil. Below that, at consistent depths across wide sections of the hull, hard reflective returns arranged in lines, the parallel walls I described. But in the central region of the formation, roughly amidships, if this really were a vessel, the radar found something different. A large, low-density zone, a gap in the returns, an enclosed pocket where the signal passed through open or hollow space before hitting a floor beneath it. In plain language, the scans found a room inside the shape, sealed, undisturbed, sitting under the mud for as long as the formation itself has existed. When I first read that, I did the thing you are probably doing right now. I looked for the mundane cause. Air pockets form in landslides, water carves cavities in soft ground. A void is not automatically a room, but the shape of this void is what stopped me, because natural cavities are irregular. They follow the path of least resistance, they are lumpy, they wander. The feature in these scans read as rectangular, bounded, with returns suggesting a floor and walls at defined angles. Nature rounds things off. It erodes corners. Right angles are the fingerprint of intention. And when a scan of a buried object comes back with corners, you are no longer looking at geology. You are looking at construction. Now here is where the cover-up thread that I have been pulling all along finally snaps tight, because the response to these findings tells you more than the findings themselves. You would think the discovery of an enclosed rectangular chamber inside a 157-meter formation that matches an ancient measurement, carrying marine residue and dating to the right window, would trigger the largest archaeological excavation of the decade. You would think the world's institutions would race to be first through the wall of that chamber. Instead, the site sits under a protective designation that has, in practice, meant almost nobody is allowed to cut into it. The Turkish authorities declared the area a protected natural monument back in the late 80s, which sounds noble and in one sense preserves it, but the effect has been to freeze it. Full excavation, the kind that would settle this in a single season by simply opening the chamber and looking inside, has not been permitted at the scale the evidence demands. The scientists take their surface samples. They run their radar. They publish careful papers full of hedged language, and the one act that would end the argument forever going in keeps not happening. I kept asking myself why. Why scan a sealed room for years and never open it? And the most uncomfortable answer I found is also the simplest, because as long as the chamber stays sealed, everyone gets to keep their position. The believers keep their arc, the skeptics keep their syncline. Nobody's career dies. The moment you open that chamber, one entire side of the debate is proven wrong on live television, and there are powerful reasons on both sides to prefer the safety of never knowing. That is the part that genuinely unsettles me. Not that the answer is unknown, that the answer may be reachable, sitting a few meters down under a mud roof that has held for thousands of years, and the deciding factor in whether we open it is politics and pride rather than science. But there is one more layer, and this is the piece I found last, the piece that made all the earlier numbers snap together into something I could not walk away from. This is the buried detail that most videos about this site never mention, because it does not come from the site at all. It comes from a clay tablet. Everyone quotes the flood story from the version they grew up with, but that version is not the oldest. There is an older account written in cuneiform on Mesopotamian tablets more than 1,000 years before the familiar telling, and one tablet in particular changes the whole picture. It is held in the British Museum, and it was translated by an Assyriologist named Irving Finkel, one of the world's leading experts on cuneiform script. He published his analysis in a book in 2014, and the tablet he worked from is often called the Ark tablet. Here is why it matters to the chamber. The older Mesopotamian account does not describe the vessel the way the storybook does. It gives building instructions, detailed ones. It specifies a huge craft, and critically, it describes the interior as divided into compartments, into sections and cabins, with internal walls separating the space. Finkel's translation lays out a structure with a defined internal layout, regular divisions running through the body of the vessel. Now go back to the radar. Parallel internal walls, evenly spaced cross returns, a rectangular enclosed chamber in the central section. The subsurface scans of the Durupinar formation do not match the simple picture from the children's version. They match the older, more detailed, more technical description carved into clay thousands of years ago, the one that specifies internal compartments and a divided interior. That is the moment that pushed my chair back from the desk, the memory I told you about at the start. Because a forger, an amateur, a wishful believer would build a hoax to match the famous version everyone knows. They would not build it to secretly match an obscure cuneiform tablet that would not even be fully translated until 2014. The shape in the mud is carrying the structural signature of the oldest version of the story, not the popular one. And no eroded rock reads an ancient tablet before deciding how to crack. Let me put the whole chain in front of you at once, the way I finally saw it, because each piece alone is dismissible, and together they are not. A boat-shaped formation, 157 meters long and about 25 meters wide, matching an ancient measurement of 300 cubits by 50 cubits to within a few feet on both dimensions. Sitting 1,900 meters up a mountain, inside a mudflow, with a bow and stern orientation. Ground-penetrating radar showing parallel internal walls and evenly spaced ribs. A central rectangular void with returns consistent with a floor and defined corners, a sealed chamber, soil samples carrying marine residue that the surrounding ground does not, dated to between roughly 5,500 and 3,000 years before the Common Era, and an internal compartment layout that matches not the famous flood story but the older cuneiform tablet translated in 2014. Any one of those, on its own, I could explain away. I tried to. That was my whole approach when I started, to knock each one down. But they do not fall down together. Each explanation that kills one piece leaves the other 5 standing, and no single ordinary answer accounts for all of them at once. Differential erosion cannot make marine chemistry. Marine chemistry cannot make right angles. Right angles cannot match a tablet nobody had translated yet. That is the definition of an anomaly the official story cannot hold. I want to be careful with you, right here at the end, because I respect you too much to oversell. I cannot tell you what is inside that chamber, because it has not been opened, and anyone who claims to know is guessing. Maybe it is empty. Maybe it has collapsed. Maybe the whole thing is the strangest coincidence in the history of geology. 6 impossible matches lining up by pure chance. But I no longer believe that, and after everything I have laid out, I do not think you do either. Here is what I actually think happened, and it is stranger and quieter than the movie version. I think something enormous, waterborne, and built by human hands, came to rest in that highland mud in the window the dating describes. I think it rotted and flattened and filled with silt over thousands of years until only its footprint remained, its walls now lines of denser material, its interior now voids in a radar scan. I think Captain Durupinar photographed a genuine buried structure in 1959, and I think we have spent 65 years finding reasons not to open the one room that would tell us for certain. The evidence existed the whole time. It was dismissed because the wrong people championed it first. It was preserved, almost by accident, by a protective designation and by scientists patient enough to keep scanning. And now it is sitting in front of you. The coordinate, the radar, the soil report, and a tablet in the British Museum waiting for someone with the authority and the nerve to go through the wall. If you have made it this far, you already know what kind of person you are. You are the kind who cannot accept a case closed in a single afternoon on a single test pit. You are the kind who looks at a shape in the mud that matches an ancient number to within a few feet and refuses to call it nothing just because calling it nothing is easier. So let me ask you the question I still cannot shake, and I genuinely want your answer. If that sealed chamber were opened tomorrow and the world watched it happen live, do you believe they would show us everything they found? Or do you think the real reason it stays sealed is that someone already suspects what is inside? Tell me in the comments. And tell me where in the world you are watching from, because this story reaches people in places I never expect. If you are the kind of person who reopens the cases everyone else was too comfortable to touch, then you are already one of us, and the next one is bigger. Because there is another formation on another mountain with another radar anomaly that 3 separate surveys recorded and then quietly stopped talking about, and I have just gotten my hands on the readings. Stay with me. We are not done pulling threads. If you want to go further with me, inside the Unexplained Society, I pick up right where we just stopped, the full case file waiting for you. And there you can ask me your own question and I answer you myself. No robot. You won't be doing this alone. So many mystery lovers like you are already inside. Just point your phone's camera at the code on your screen, and you can cancel anytime. Now, if that sealed chamber left you wondering, the next part goes even deeper. Right here, a careful new look at the Book of Enoch reveals who those beings outside the ark truly were. Stay with me, it's starting now.